Welcome to The Explainer. You know, we've all met that one person who just seems effortlessly, dangerously productive, right? They aren't stressed, they aren't frazzled, and they definitely aren't burning the midnight oil, yet somehow they always outpace everyone else. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating framework that reveals the exact principles separating true dangerous productivity from the exhausting, endless cycle of simply being busy. Think about the typical busy person for a second. They're just vibrating with this frantic, unfocused energy, running in a million different directions and constantly exhausted. It's like they're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But then contrast that with the dangerously productive person. Their execution is calm, purposeful, and honestly feels almost effortless. Every single step they take is completely intentional. And to make that transition yourself, you literally have to rewire how you approach your daily tasks. To go from simply busy to dangerously productive, we're going to dismantle 3 massive traps holding you back. We'll look at the performance paradox, the obvious target trap, and the marginal gains fallacy, before finally pulling it all together into a practical, less is more formula. All right, part 1, the performance paradox, redefining true productivity. Okay, so we have to start by defining what productivity actually is. And according to the source material, it really hinges on one crucial word, product. If you want to be productive, you absolutely must have a clear product in mind. Now, that might be passing a major exam, landing a promotion, or even just living a balanced, intentional life. But without a defined product, you're just spinning your wheels. The busy person spends their time just doing stuff. The dangerously productive person spends time doing stuff that specifically builds their intended product. When we obsess over just being busy, we start treating ourselves like machines. The source gives this incredibly visceral analogy that I love. Imagine some gung-ho young race car driver who pushes their engine so hard it literally catches on fire just to cross the first finish line. I mean, sure, they won today's race, but what happens when there's a harder race tomorrow? You can't win if your car is burnt to a crisp. You are the driver, you are the vehicle, and you are the fuel. So here's the absolute kicker, and it's super counterintuitive. To get more product, you often need to do less. Seriously, recharging your battery, getting enough sleep, protecting your downtime, and deliberately ignoring tasks that just don't matter, that isn't laziness. It is the vital maintenance required to keep you in the race long enough to actually win. Sometimes stepping away is the single most productive thing you can do. Moving right along to part 2, the obvious target trap, unpacking prioritization. Look, we've all been there. You try to duct tape like 4 different apps together to build this ultimate automated productivity dashboard. The source actually calls this the obvious target trap. You spot a minor organizational problem, you spend hours over optimizing it, and then one app updates and your entire ecosystem completely collapses. The reality? 90% of our productivity problems aren't a lack of fancy apps, they're just a lack of prioritization. True execution thrives on simplicity. Think a basic calendar, a notebook, and a plain old pen. And this is exactly why prioritizing is so absolutely crucial. It's the classic Pareto principle in action. If you've got a to-do list of 10 things and you don't aggressively prioritize, you have an 80% chance of wasting your effort on tasks that simply do not move the needle. Your job isn't to smash through your list as fast as humanly possible. It's to identify the 20% of tasks that are your key levers and then actively reject the rest. So how do we actually pull this off? Well, we use something called the or, not, and framework. Think about it. When someone asks you to take on a new project or, grab a coffee, your immediate instinct is probably to say, sure, I'll do that and my other tasks. But that's a trap. Instead, you need to be thinking, I can do this or I can do my other task. You have to ask yourself what you are willing to actively sacrifice to fit this new commitment in. You're choosing what to lose, which forces you to confront your actual realistic capacity. Which leads to a really counterintuitive gem. Correct prioritization should actually feel kind of bad. Yeah, if organizing your day doesn't hurt a little bit, you aren't doing it right. It feels bad because you are actively saying no to things you genuinely want to do. But avoiding that temporary pain just means you end up overwhelmed and failing to deliver on the things that actually matter. Feeling that pinch? That means you're in the driver's seat. You're deliberately taking control of your time. Now, as you're making these choices, it is vital to separate your daily task priorities from your long-term core values. If you try to balance all your core values every single day, you'll just create this rigid, totally impossible schedule.
Think of your values as your long-term compass. You balance those over the course of weeks or even months. Your daily task priorities, on the other hand, are the specific road you're driving on today based on what you immediately need. It's totally okay to say no to socializing on a Monday if you know you're going to make up for it on Friday.
All right, part 3, the marginal gains fallacy, rethinking daily improvements.
I'm sure you've heard the mainstream advice by now, especially from wildly popular books like Atomic Habits. The idea is that if you get just 1% better every day, those compounding gains will make you 37 times better by the end of the year. It's a super inspiring concept, but when applied blindly, it can actually turn into a massive trap.
Because here's where that myth kind of falls apart. Yes, making a correct 1% micro-optimization totally leads to compounding gains, but without the right feedback, you might actually be making a change that makes you 1% worse every day, and that leads to a massive gradual decline. Or honestly, even more commonly, you're just wildly fluctuating up and down every day, which means you end up making zero real progress over time.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that the difference between marginally improving, marginally failing, or just staying completely stagnant comes down entirely to measuring the correct data. If you optimize for the wrong metric, your compounding daily changes will literally just compound your failure. You only get the gain when you measure what actually matters. The source breaks this down into 2 very specific types of metrics you need to track real progress. First, you've got outcome metrics. These give you the direct data on whether you hit your overarching goal, like the actual revenue generated or your final exam score. But because outcome metrics are usually delayed or a bit ambiguous, you also need proxy metrics. These are your checkpoint signals. They tell you if your daily, on-the-ground efforts are actually pointing you in the right direction.
Let's put this into perspective to see how it builds a bridge to actual success. Say you want to learn a complex new skill. An easy, but honestly terrible, proxy metric is tracking hours studied. If you use a shortcut, like, say, having AI completely summarize your notes, you might cut your study time in half. Boom, optimized, right? But if your true outcome metric is knowledge retention, that shortcut just caused your entire bridge to collapse. Dangerously productive people do the tedious work of building a sturdy bridge. They use proxy metrics like mentor feedback to ensure their daily habits actually connect to the true outcome. Which brings us to part 4, the less is more formula, becoming dangerously productive. So, true productivity. It is definitely not about running faster on the hamster wheel. It's a deliberate, calculated formula. First, you have got to protect your fuel through intentional rest so you can avoid the performance paradox. Second, dodge the obvious target trap by keeping your systems incredibly simple and just embracing the emotional pain of aggressively saying no. And finally, to beat the marginal gains fallacy, make sure your daily habits compound correctly by measuring only the metrics that actually move the needle. And that brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought for this explainer. Think back on your past week. Look really closely at how you spent your time. Were you simply moving fast, trying to optimize these obvious little targets just to feel busy? Ask yourself, are you driving your vehicle toward a specific, measurable destination? Or are you just trying to see how fast you can burn through your fuel? Keep that in mind the next time you look at your to-do list. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you on the next explainer.